I'm sorry, Judge, I heard some voices in the corner and it distracted me. I apologize.
Today, we're going to take a closer look at John Pryor's cross-examination of Melanie Gibb and why she could be problematic for the state. Before we begin, a small disclaimer. I don't like John Pryor. I think he's a bully, he has a sexual assault charge in his past, and I certainly do not like his client. However, let's put that aside for today and look at what he's doing here during this hearing. I'm of the opinion that even though this questioning was uncomfortable to watch, let alone for the person on the stand, he is doing what any decent defense attorney should do: impeach the character, testimony, and credibility of the state's star witness. Let's watch a clip and then we'll talk about how he starts off.
Ms. Gibbs, Ms. Gibb, I apologize. When did you first meet Mr. Daybell?
About, I think 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, if I reflect, the information I have is that you were at a preparedness camp in July of 2017 in Ogden, Utah. Is that correct?
In Morgan, Utah. Yes, that's correct.
Morgan, Utah?
Mm-hmm.
Is Morgan close to Ogden?
Yes.
Okay. And would you explain to me what a preparedness camp is?
It was a camp.
Objection, relevance.
Mr. Pryor's been objection as to relevance.
Well, Judge, there was testimony that they met. I think I can inquire as to the nature of that relationship and what they were both there for, and I don't think it's necessarily irrelevant. There's a discussion. It's much like we went to a concert or we went to a play. It's the same thing. I think I'm allowed to inquire about that. I don't see that that's necessarily irrelevant.
I'll overrule the objection. You may continue with that question, Mr. Pryor.
And again, ma'am, before Mr. Wood injected his objection, there was a question about what is a preparedness camp?
It's a camp where people get together, families and individuals, where they're learning about how to cook outside or how to filter water or different preparedness skills.
Preparedness for what?
For if there's times where you may not have those types of things readily available to you, that you could learn to do it if you didn't have electricity, things like that.
Okay, well, I noticed when I was listening to your tape, and obviously I've heard that before, there were some religious references on that tape between you and Miss Vallow. And I'm just curious as to whether this preparedness camp has any kind of a religious undertone as well.
Objection, relevance.
Overruled. I think there was a lot of religious undertones that were put forth yesterday. I'm going to allow Mr. Pryor to go down this road in a limited way here today. I'm going to allow that question.
And again, there was a religious undertone, and I don't want to go into complete detail about this, and it's not necessary. But I would like you to explain what is in your mind the religious nature of these preparedness camps.
Your client was one of those people that spoke at that, and he was expressing his visions and dreams.
I'm going to move to strike. The question is what's the religious undertone? It's not when my client participated, ma'am. It's what is the undertone of this? So I'd like you to answer my question as opposed to pushing some blame on my client. So would you answer the question?
Objection, this is argumentative.
Hold up, we're going to take a timeout here. Mr. Pryor, I want you to ask the question. Ms. Gibb, I want you to answer the question that Mr. Pryor is asking you. I'm not going to tell you how to answer that question, but I want you to listen carefully to the question that he asks. Understand, after Mr. Pryor asks you these questions, Mr. Wood will get a chance to offer any redirect if he deems that's necessary, which can often provide clarification. But I want you to listen carefully to the question that's being asked of you and answer only that question. Mr. Pryor, you can ask the question again.
So I noticed you just took a look at Mr. Wood. Is there a reason why you just did that?
I looked around.
Oh, you looked around?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I didn't actually look at his face.
Okay. Just over in that direction. So why don't you tell me what the religious nature of this preparedness camp is, ma'am?
People sharing their spiritual experiences,
Okay.
scriptural based to personal dreams.
Does it have a specific religious affiliation in this religious preparedness camp?
people that belong to our church,
What church is that, ma'am?
the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
So you represent yourself as an LDS person, is that correct?
Correct.
Right out of the gate, John Pryor's first line of questioning is problematic for the state, and Rob Wood objects to it immediately. Now, what's going on here? John Pryor is trying to show what these preparedness camps really are, and Melanie is trying to skirt around the issue by saying, "Oh, we learned to cook outside and how to filter water. He. No, that's not what they are. These are the LDS offshoot extremist preppers who believe the end of the world is coming and they need to get ready for the call out to go to their tent cities and learn how to survive there to get through the tribulations. But certainly the state doesn't want that discussed right now because that's going to make their star witness look a little crazy, and John Pryor is really trying to get to the heart of that issue by asking about the religious undertones for these preparedness camps. The judge does allow Pryor to ask those questions because it is relevant, because the day before during her direct exam, Melanie talks a lot about her religious undertones. So there you go. Now it's in evidence, and Pryor has her on check number 1. Melanie also has another bad move in her answers when she says, "Your client was a speaker at the event" to John Pryor, clearly trying to throw Chad under the bus, and John Pryor's not having it. He moves to strike. Rob Wood says it's argumentative. The judge eventually allows the question. Now, the best gotcha moment, I think, for John Pryor at the end of this first segment, when he pins Melanie down to linking these preparedness camps to the LDS Church directly, and also confirming herself as an LDS member. That's going to be a big deal later on at trial. Let's move on now to the next clip.
I'm just checking my mind with my dates. I believe so.
Is there anything that you have in terms of a medical condition that affects your ability to recollect anything, ma'am?
No,
Is there any condition such as an auditory disorder that you've been diagnosed with that affects your ability to understand and hear things?
no,
You've never been medically diagnosed with an auditory disorder?
no.
Okay. At some
All right,
point-
what he's doing here is getting Melanie on record stating that she has no hearing disorders, and I believe that what he's going to do is bring this up at trial to question her testimony as to what she did or did not hear the night that JJ was murdered while she was in Lori's apartment. So keep that in mind going forward.
Okay, and what was the nature of the proceeding that you were at? Was it a preparedness camp again?
No, it was a held by the church, inside the church, about preparedness type of classes that they asked me to speak on.
Okay, and this was the church that was supporting this preparedness situation was part of the LDS Church. Is that correct?
Yes, but these groups are separate.
I'm sorry, say that again?
These groups are not affiliated with each other.
Okay, but it was at an LDS church and it was an LDS sponsored event. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Again, we have Pryor going in on the LDS Church links. This is important because Pryor is accomplishing two things with this question. First, he's getting Melanie to testify again, on record and under oath, that there is a direct link between this group of people, their events, and the proper LDS Church. Pryor can say, "Chad isn't some crazy cult leader. Look, we have testimony that he's actually LDS." But at the same time, he can use Melanie's testimony to discredit her because clearly some, if not most, of their beliefs are definitely not actual LDS.
And what was the nature of that meeting? What was?
It was a variety of speakers.
Okay. And what was the topics?
We had some talking about science.
Okay.
We had some talking about Book of Mormon evidence.
Okay.
We had some talking about their dreams of visions.
Okay. And were you a speaker at that as well?
No,
There's a gentleman's name who came up, and it's Mr. Warwick. You mentioned him a couple of times
Yes.
yesterday. What's your relationship with Mr. Warwick?
he's my boyfriend.
Okay. Are you two living together?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Do you know where Mr. Warwick lives?
Yes,
Where does he live?
he lives in Utah,
Where in Utah?
Pleasant Grove,
Okay. Where do you live, ma'am?
Gilbert, Arizona.
And that's your permanent address in Gilbert, Arizona?
Correct.
Here's another setup for character impeachment later on. Melanie Gibb was married with children when she left her husband and kids behind to go off on this religious mission lark with Chad and Lori. David Warwick was also married. Remember in the phone call between Melanie, Lori, and Chad that Melanie tries to use their affair against them, but Lori throws it right back in her face, saying that she too was having an affair. You can bet that Pryor will hammer that point home at the trial.
And Mr. Daybell, do you recall what his topic was at that time on October of 2018?
Yes, he talked about the different visions he had of what he saw was going to happen in the last days.
Is that something that interested you?
Yes,
Is that something that's inconsistent with your religious beliefs?
no,
Okay. So it's something that's consistent with your religious beliefs, is that correct?
yes.
Okay, all right. And then, so you had known Miss Vallow at that point for how long?
A few weeks.
Okay. Did you form a friendship?
Yes,
Was it an immediate friendship?
yes,
Would you describe, obviously I heard some of your testimony on that tape, but from that time in October until, maybe the beginning of last year, you had a very close friendship. Would that be fair?
yes,
Sisters.
possibly.
Here's another quick setup that I feel is Pryor simply getting her on record now about how close she was to Lori, so that she can't turn around later and say she barely knew her. Certainly that's something we've seen from so many people in this case, so I think this was just a preemptive strike to prevent that later on.
And then at some point there was a question regarding the whereabouts of JJ, is that right?
Correct.
And at that point you had advised him that you had JJ in your care, correct?
I told him that I had him and then I didn't have him.
Okay. So the initial time that you told him that you had JJ, that was not a truthful statement to Officer Pillar, was it?
Correct.
And when you tell a statement that's not accurate to a police officer, that's a lie, is it not?
Correct.
So you lied to a police officer, is that correct?
Correct.
This part was a big deal. First, this was news to us. In all of Melanie's TV appearances, she never says that she lied to the police. In fact, she says that when Chad and Lori asked her to lie for them, she wouldn't do that. She said in her interview with Nate Eaton that when Lori asked her to lie about JJ and get pictures on her phone of random kids running around at the movies to make it look like JJ was with her, nuh-uh, I don't make up stuff like that. So this line of questioning is very important. It gets her on the record as being a non-credible witness, and that's going to hurt her a lot at trial.
The initial call from Officer Gilbert occurred sometime in late November. Would you have any reason to disagree with that, ma'am?
No,
And then the time when you decided to tell Officer Gilbert the truth, at least what you think the truth is, was sometime in December, the 6th of December.
correct.
So approximately 10 to 12 days passed from the time you told your first lie to when you decided to come up with a different story for Officer Gilbert later on, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So again, Mr. Wood has never specifically offered you any deal to testify in any manner in this case. Is that correct?
Never.
All right, in that clip, we see John Pryor setting up an answer for a question that a lot of us have had too. Does Melanie Gibb have an immunity deal? And she does not. That's got to be one of the dumbest things I have ever heard in my life. With someone with the amount of knowledge that she has regarding this case, to not have adequate representation and or an immunity deal is absolutely ridiculous. Melanie, please get a lawyer. Let's move on now to John Pryor's questions about the call that Melanie recorded between her, Chad, and Lori.
Were you prompted by law enforcement to make that phone call?
Nope.
You did that on your own.
Yep.
And the questions you asked were questions that you planned ahead of time to ask Lori about what was going on, correct?
Correct.
And you planned this as a means of trying to gain some information to somehow either clarify things for you, correct?
Partially correct. I had many objectives in that, and that was
Okay.
one of them,
Okay.
to show my innocence.
Okay, and one of the other objectives, then we'll talk about that, is to impress upon the police that you did nothing wrong. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you needed to prove to the police that you were innocent of no wrongdoing. Is that correct?
That wasn't my full objective.
But it was one of the objectives, wasn't it?
Yes.
I'm not entirely sure where Pryor was going with this line of questioning, but I find it very interesting that Melanie took great pains to point out the fact that she did this call to prove her innocence, far more so than the motivation to help get information to find the children. Now we're going to get into Pryor's questioning about Melanie's relationship with Tylie.
You had a poor relationship with Tylie, and isn't that correct?
I would say I had pretty much a no relationship with Tylie.
Right. She didn't care. Well, all right, I want to strike this because I don't want to misrepresent. both of you weren't particularly fond of each other. Is that correct?
I don't know how she felt about me, but I did not have a relationship with her. I would not say that.
Okay. Okay. But it's no surprise that she didn't necessarily want to be around you, did she?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
You could really care less whether you were around her as well. Isn't that true, ma'am?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Well, if it's not necessarily, does that mean yes, no, or you just don't want to answer?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
This was a very interesting point the prior was raising, one that I hadn't heard about before. I believe that he's trying to assert that Melanie and Tylie didn't like each other at all, which would lend weight to an assumption that Melanie was more heavily involved in the conspiracy than she'd care to admit. I expect to hear a lot more about their relationship at trial. But next, Pryor's going to ask some very uncomfortable questions about Melanie's autistic son. Let's play the clip and then we'll talk about it.
That with Ms. Vallow, as you have an autistic child as well, do you not, ma'am?
Correct.
Okay. Now, that child was also interviewed by the police about the whereabouts of J.J. Vallow. Do you recall that?
Yes.
To your recollection, were you ever present when your son and J.J. Vallow had a short visit at the time period that he was talking about, ma'am?
They never had a visit during that period.
Okay. So that was not a truthful statement that your son made to the Gilbert Police
My
Department?
son did not
Objection
understand the
calls for
question.
hearsay.
It's not calling for hearsay. That's just asking whether or not she believes it was a truthful statement to the police department about her son saying she had a visit with J.J. Vallow when it didn't happen.
All right, this line of questioning was very uncomfortable to watch. I'm a parent of an autistic child, so I get very defensive when I start hearing these things. However, we need to look at the legal side of what's happening here. From what we can tell from Pryor's entire line of questioning, Melanie's autistic son was questioned by the Gilbert Police Department and told them that at one point in time, the time in question here, that he had a visit with JJ. And Melanie is very defensive about this, as anyone would be, but it does have legal consequences for the case. Pryor could assert at a later time that Melanie coached her son to give this answer, so it's important to get it on the record. I do hope that that line of questioning won't come up in the trial, but knowing Pryor, it probably will. But this part definitely did not endear me to him at all, but it is important to understand why he asked those questions.
Now, on the Sunday, the 22nd, did David and Chad go to deal with some real estate matters together?
I did as well, and so Alex was there too.
Oh, that was news to me. I wasn't aware you went as well. Where did you guys go?
We went to a lot that was close to Mr. Daybell's home.
And what time was that? Do you recall?
It was sometime in the afternoon. I don't recall exactly.
And the purpose of that was for what, ma'am?
Chad wanted to show this piece of land to David, and he encouraged him to consider building on that land.
Okay. Was Lori Vallow present for that?
No,
Was Alex present for that?
yes.
Woo! This piece of testimony is a big problem for me. Let me tell you why. What we have here is Melanie testifying that on the 22nd, which is the day that JJ was murdered, her and David, Chad and Alex were viewing a piece of property near Chad's home. Why is that such an issue? Well, as we remember from the probable cause affidavit, Alex was only at Chad's home for 17 minutes the morning when JJ was buried. Was that hole pre-dug? Were these people all there doing it? Whatever happened, we don't know, but knowing that they were all in the vicinity is a big problem. Also, take a mental note here that Melanie states that Lori was not present. That's going to be important later on when we look at David Warwick's testimony.
Correct.
Yes.
You talked a little bit about Alex carrying JJ back into Lori's apartment.
Correct.
So with you in one bedroom and your boyfriend in the other bedroom and Lori in a bedroom, where was JJ?
He had like a little bed in the corner of her room.
Okay.
And so that's where she would have him sleep.
Oh, okay. And to your knowledge, was JJ there at night between 9 and 12?
To my knowledge, he was.
And Alex put him to bed, is that correct?
I just remember him coming in the house holding him, and then I turned back to the recording that I was doing that evening.
Okay, and that's the LDS religion?
Correct.
So Lori was actively involved as well in the LDS religion at that time during that meeting as well, correct?
Correct.
And she shared the same beliefs that you share in terms of the religion. Is that correct?
Correct,
And Chad shared the same religious beliefs as part of the LDS church as well, correct?
correct.
Okay. So all of you, David, yourself, Lori, and Chad all share the same and are consistent with your LDS beliefs. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Correct.
you. Well, if you didn't know he slept there when you were doing your podcast, how did you know he was there? Wasn't there? in the
As I
morning?
said, I don't recall seeing him. I never recall seeing him.
Oh, so he may have been there.
I didn't see him.
Okay, but he may have been there or he may not have been there. Would that be a fair statement?
It could be fair.
Okay, thank you.
This part is pretty simple. It's just Pryor saying that Melanie and David will not be able to testify for sure if JJ was there or not.
Talk to me a little bit about, I think you said King Noah. Was it King Noah? Is that what you mentioned on the tape when you were talking to Lori Vallow?
Yes,
Okay. And the date of that conversation with Lori was when, December 8th again?
yes.
And I missed, I was having some difficulty kind of gathering what the reference to King Noah was about. Tell me about that.
She brought the reference up to the fact that a prophet named Alma, and she asked me about Alma. And so I explained to her, the people that were surrounded with that occurrence of Alma's experience.
And here we have another example of Pryor bringing up the LDS Church into the mix. I really think what he's trying to do is set up the defense to say that Chad was not crazy, he wasn't a cult leader, he had very mainstream Mormon beliefs, and he's got Melanie Gibb to prove that, coming and going. Somehow, I don't believe the LDS Church leaders are going to be real happy about this, but we'll see.
A book or a document that story is told in?
Oh, it's in the Book of Mormon.
It's in the Book of Mormon, okay.
Correct.
So your reference with Lori, obviously she understands that because she was actively and still participating in the LDS religion.
Correct.
And Mr. Daybell was actively participating in the LDS religion, correct?
That I know of.
Okay. And you are actively participating in the LDS religion.
Correct.
So all of you understood the references that you were
Yes.
talking about. That's what I was trying to get at. And thank you, ma'am, for explaining that. I didn't understand, okay? And please excuse my ignorance. You haven't read all of his books, but the nature of it is that he's a fiction writer. Is that fair?
Fair.
And who was present at that real estate discussion?
First, it was Lori Vallow, Alex Cox, Melanie Gibb, and then Chad showed up later with a realtor.
All right, so there is Melanie Gibb's cross-examination by John Pryor. As much as we may not like the guy, I think he did a very good job setting things up for the future. And I think Melanie Gibb doesn't have any idea the train wreck that's about to hit her. So I really hope she finds a good lawyer, because I think she's going to need one. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the cross-examination. I could pontificate about this for hours, but let's be brief, it's already been 30 minutes. So thank you for watching. I appreciate all of your support. Please like and subscribe, and let me know what you want to go over next. I am keeping my eye on the news, so please hit the notification bell. If anything big happens, I'll bring it to you live, and look forward to almost daily news updates. Whenever there's news, there will be a video. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.